But anyway, we moved over to Pabzorg here in Denmark.
And when was that?
That was in February. I looked in my passport. It was February '69.
So you moved from Edinburgh to
Copenhagen.
Copenhagen in '69.
It was in Tolbergade then game. We had so we came over here and worked. I worked in there for 2 or 3 years before I decided that I'd had enough. My contract was up, and but that's a later thing. We're getting back to the books. There is a book there, Scientology 08.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've lost it.
No, it's right there behind the...
Oh, there we are. Yes, it's lost its cover. Well, what happened was that I had... I was working... Oh, yeah. I was working in printing, Mimeo. I actually left this out, but it was me who introduced offset printing to St. Hill a little bit earlier.
All right.
But I was doing printing at Pabzorg here
In Copenhagen.
Copenhagen, and the man who was doing that book left without warning. We call it a blow in Scientology. So they approached me and asked me if I would do it, and it was it was very interesting. And it also, the point about it is that this book, it just says L. Ron Hubbard, and it came out in 69, I think. It wasn't really L. Ron Hubbard who wrote it. It's compiled of the work of L. Ron Hubbard. And there was a man, a very a Scientologist from the beginning, John Sanborn, who had come to St. Hill, or come to Pabzorg when Pabzorg was formed. And he also compiled the book Phoenix Lectures in Pabzorg then. You might wonder why it came out so late compared with the actual Phoenix Lectures were 10 years earlier. But anyway, what happened was that I made an arrangement, arrangement with them that I would work early in the morning on Scientology 08. I could then have leave for a couple of hours because I was taking a Danish course, because I reckoned to stay in Denmark when I left. And then in the afternoon I would come back and do my printing job.
So you said you were working on the book in the morning. What did it mean to work on the book? You were typing it, or what were you doing?
Every morning I would get from John Sanborn what had to be done, and I could. It's not easy. I mean, there's there's these tables. That's not easy. It's not easy formatting them. But anyway, I did all that. I'm rather proud of it. Unfortunately, I've lost the copy of the book where it thanks me for them, but I did get a thanks for it.
From Hubbard?
No, from the CO.
Okay.
CO of the order. I don't think Hubbard ever knew it. My name's not in it either, so.
No.
When we came to Denmark, we lived in a boat. There was it was called the Hotel Ship St. Lawrence, and it was actually a steamer that went up and down the St. Lawrence at one time, but we had a cabin. Each of us had a cabin there.
And where was it?
And that was in the harbour.
So at one point you said you stopped working for Pops. What happened there?
Well, the reason I stopped was because I had a contract. I have had 2.5-year contracts, and the last one was up, and I knew it was coming, and I had planned to leave, and it was the interesting decision of why. I could have of course gone back to England, but I rather liked Denmark, so I sort of decided to stay there. But I had to learn English. I'm Danish.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Because I've seen many people come here who didn't bother to learn Danish, and you don't really get to know the culture and so forth. So I'm half Danish now, and I'm proud of it. I've
So
been 40 years in Denmark and 40 years in England, sort of thing.
And you speak brilliant Danish, I can tell.
Well,
You do.
But anyway,
Well, when was this?
What was the question?
Your contract expired. When was that? In 72 or 73, or when was it?
yes, I don't know more closely, I'm
Okay.
afraid.
So you stopped working for Pops. Was that a problem that you didn't renew your contract? Did you get into trouble with the organization?
No, but I tell you what did happen. When it was known that I was going to leave, I had a lot of cooperation actually. There was lots of people had trouble changing posts or leaving because they'd introduced a policy which said you mustn't leave a post until you had trained up a replacement. But the person who was running the org, she was a South African, I've forgotten her name, but she made sure that somebody came in and I trained them up. So I didn't really have any trouble leaving. But the funny thing was that when it was known I was going to leave, somebody from the Sea Org, I got an invitation to come and have supper at the Athena, which was the ship which was here. I wondered, what on earth are they doing this for? So I went round and had supper there, and I got told, well, you've worked in a class 4 org, and you've worked at St. Hill, that's 2 delivery orgs, and now you've worked at Pubs org. The only place for you now is the Sea Org. And the Sea Org was the last place I would go.
Why is
Because although Pubs org wasn't Sea Org, it was infiltrated sort of by the Sea Org, and we used to do things that the Sea Org did, and by that time we were working ridiculous hours sometimes, and so forth. So I'd had enough. And very fortunately, I did this printing job, and the printer, the man who gave us supplies for the printing, I got in contact with him and told him I was looking for a job when I was leaving, and he said he'd give me one.
Oh, that's great.
So I got a little bit impatient, and I got a job, and it was a horrible job. It was printing, but it was a lot of confusion in it. So I came back, and actually I worked with Athena Publications, which was a separate thing, but it was Ken Delderfield and Rosemary. They did these red books and the green books there, and and this man got me a job, and the job was in an insurance company which gave me let me rent this flat, and later the flat became made over, so I own it and paid for it, so I was happy there.
But you were still a Scientologist. You were still a member
Oh yes.
of this organization,
Oh, yes,
even though you didn't work for it anymore.
I did. I was still enthusiastic about it, and I did my best.
And what did you do? Did you take courses or got auditing or?
Well, I was running these, well, I call them these silly OT levels. I was on OT 3. That went on for a long time. But I also did, I wanted to do my best as a good, loyal Scientologist. So I found out, because I wanted my e-meter, I had to get it repaired. So I took it into Pubsorg and to have it repaired. And I was shown a pile of meters that high, it'd be about 10 or 15. They were waiting till they got someone to repair them. So I sort of offered, and I managed to get 3 people in Denmark to repair meters, and I had 1 man in Germany. I was the unofficial e-meter repair in charge, and I had a man, Don Meyer, in Germany, who was an American, who came into Scientology in '50, and he used to travel around Germany, working not as a member of, but working for the American Army in Germany, and he went to orgs there and repaired e-meters. That was one thing I did.
So you worked as a volunteer, actually,
That
for
was a
Pop's Org.
volunteer, yes, there was no pay.
Yeah.
The another thing I did was they set up something called the Auditors Association, and that was for field auditors, and I became the secretary or the registrar, and another man was the other part. I thought it would be marvellous if we offered to help an org, and they could go around and see how an org worked. And there were various orgs. We went round to various orgs here, and we went out to a franchise in Ikast, which is right on the other side of Denmark. And people were so surprised that somebody would come. They were trying to get people to buy services and so forth, and they were so surprised that somebody came in and offered to help. So we called, they were sort of shocked, so we used to call what we did a shock assist. And the other thing was, later on I formed Scientology Mini Group 2, and the purpose, I was very enthusiastic about the data series, so we had a little group who was translating that and so forth.
Okay.
And then
And while you did all this volunteer work, you also progressed up the bridge. How far did you get? Did you go further than '03?
I didn't progress up the silly bridge.
You said you went to '03, or?
I started OT3 in 1968, and I thought I'd done it. I did it in a weekend, Easter weekend, and got a certificate. And later it was decided, and that was hell. I mean, yeah, I was devastated when I went to Alicante in a plane. They hired a plane to go to Alicante, and it was, yeah. I've written it up, and I think one should read it there. But it was a farce. So afterwards they cancelled my certificate, and I was still on OT3 up until 1969. 1969, this is the interesting. 1969, I was working in this insurance company with a very good, secure job. And my mother had died, my father died previously, and that meant to say that I inherited, in effect, half a house. So I had some money, and the commanding officer of Pubs Org had a problem. They had had an order from Ron that all films which were on large reels, which broken or I don't know what, they should be moved to cassettes. And they had done it for all the films that Ron had made, except for the clearing course films. There were, I don't know, I can't remember, there were 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 clearing course films. These hadn't been done. They hadn't been done because it could only be done by somebody who was OT3. They mustn't look at it if they weren't OT3. So I was asked if I would do this project, which was to go over to England. There's a firm called J. Arthur Rank, and they would do it. And I was to make sure that they didn't look at it. Mad. And anyway, I gave up my job. And there's also another, it's not a relation, but there's a man by the name of Peter Phillips. And he was assigned with this. He was in England. and he edited the film. The films hadn't been properly edited, and I was in England. This was the end of '69. I was in England for 2 or 3 months, and it really was a farce because I didn't do anything. I certainly didn't stand there and watch them do it and see they didn't see the film and so forth.
But films, that's tape lectures or what?
No, they're films.
Actual films?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
In one of them, Ron demonstrates. This is funny. He demonstrates a solo auditing session. In order to synchronize the sound with the video, normally they do it with a clapper, or if they're professional. But he went like this, and then started doing the lecture. And the CO, commanding officer of Pubsall, wondered because it was still on the film. It hadn't been edited out.
Uh-huh.
So we found out the people on the solo levels were starting their sessions going
That's quite funny.
idiotic. And that was edited out, and I was there for 3 months. And I had this. I'd say, I'm not sure if it's 3 months, but it was rather long. And I had this money, and I hadn't a job. I'd given the job up, silly fool. I don't know if it's a silly fool because I've had some rather interesting jobs since, and I'm very happy, so. But anyway, they found out this new thing called knots. And they found out that I was finished with my OT3 and I should do knots.
So that was up in 78, I suppose. 78.
This was, I'm talking about 1980.
80, yeah, okay. Because Nuts came out in
Okay.
78. September
I
78.
thought it was 79, but I don't know.
Yeah, but
anyway,
that was, yeah.
my sequence is 80.
Yeah.
And I went... so I went full-time on knots. And
And
also...
that has been at AOSH in Jernbanegade.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. I was there. Pubsall at that time was now down in Jernbanegade on the first floor. But I started knots, and this is an interesting thing. I think I told you that I've been on an advanced clinical course before.
Yes.
Now the interesting thing there was when the advanced clinical courses were started, they were the highest level in Scientology. And Ron had said that anyone who had taken that and paid for it would have all courses free afterwards. And then loads more courses came and this was ignored. But he issued a policy letter saying that in order to partly fulfill that promise, anyone who had been on an advanced clinical course and paid for it could have the briefing course for free. I think that time Standard Dianetics came out. They could have a Standard Dianetic course and I think some auditing. So I took, doing knots, you have a 3-minute session and then you have to wait for 3 or 4 hours till the next session comes. So I was down in the academy doing these briefing course things, and I did this for, I did one level of the briefing course, that would be the level 0 and level 1. And then they wanted, something called the Happiness Rundown came out. And they sold me Happiness Rundown course and then internship, and that was really fantastic. That was I think it's the best course I've ever had, the best course in internship. I really learned a lot from that. So I was very happy with that. Something else happened at that time was that there's something called an admin scale, and I tried to work with that, and I gave people, sort of as a research thing, I gave various, I think 10 or 12 people admin scales. And my money ran out. And fortunately, not quite unknowingly, but I'd come into the Danish fagforening as a trade union sort
Trade
of
union
thing,
system, yeah.
where you could get money
Yeah.
if you were without. So I was getting a little bit of money there.
But did you have to pay for your knots and for your happiness course?
I paid for the knots, and I paid for the happiness course and the happiness internship.
Even though you had taken the advanced clinical course?
Yeah, that's right, because he did the promise, you know.
Yeah, okay.
But I got,
And did you
I mean,
ever-
I got a 2 bits of the briefing course for free, and I could have got more,
Mhm.
but the happiness rundown wasn't included in that.
Okay, yeah.
But anyway, this gets to the being thrown out of the church.
Mhm.
I did these, I don't quite remember all about it, but I did these admin scales, and they issued they never looked at them. I've never seen anybody officially see what I'd done or anything. But for some reason they came out with something that's called a non-interpolation auditor. And it said that Antony Phillips had been doing squirrel admin scales. But anyway, that happened, and I got some sort of a warning. But then something happened. This is so fantastically idiotic. I had a bit of money left, so I decided I would have. They had introduced a thing where you had to do a security check every time you did a new level. So I thought, well, with that money I could have a security check. So I did it. And after the last session, oh yes, the other thing was that I was trying once more to build up a practice, but I was doing it on a different level. There was this interesting thing. I had bought this thing. This had been approved by issue authority, by Scientology, and it's the use of Scientology technology for businesses.
So you did your volunteer work for the organization, and in the late 70s, early 80s, I suppose, and you did your knots, and you did your happiness course,
Yeah.
and your admin scales,
Yeah.
and you were saying that you were being thrown out of Scientology. You got a non-interpolation order, and can you tell what happened in that period?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I had this. I had my last session and used my last money up there, and I was kept waiting for over an hour for an interview or something. And at that time, I was trying to get a job. I was going out and interviewing people, or trying to sell them this admin technology, which I thought I was so good at. And I was doing that, and I had got myself a very badly paid job, poorly paid job, you could say, in a taxi firm, answering the telephone at night. And this was a bit much. So I got a little bit furious about waiting an hour. And I don't know, there's some people may know about this, but there was a motto about that time that what do you call it? Clearwater was the perfection of tech or something like that. And I said to the person, the people I said while I was waiting, I said, I'm sure that in Clearwater they wouldn't keep you waiting so long, and this must be perhaps part of why they are so good. But anyway, I expected that with all the complaint I was making, they would put me into session and run an ARC break. No? They sent me to Qual. Qual sent me to ethics and made me write out my overts. This is, as the people who've been through this know about it, and there's no big news, but it was a bit odd to me. But anyway, I did my best for 3 or 4 days writing out my overts. I'd take them into the woman in AOSH in Jörnbenegade, and she would look them and take them over to somebody, and they'd say, no, you've got to write some more and something. And then I came in with this one day, and from behind me, there came the secretary of the man who ran the whole of that department, and said something like, more or less, you're doing this for free, and we're not willing to give you services for free. And they sent me over to, it was FOLO or EULO.
Mm-hmm.
This was the head organization for the whole of Europe, but it was totally administrative, and put me on something which was called DEC Project Force. And the funny thing was that this was normally just for staff members.
Mm-hmm.
But I was not a staff member, so I was going on there part-time. And it was ridiculous. There was two aspects to it. The one aspect was that you should sit down and write your overts. Overts, things you had done wrong. And the other thing was that you would do some work. You must run all the time, and you had to do things like, I think I delivered flyers in blocks of flats or something. But I was doing this part-time, and trying to get some sleep, and doing my not answering the telephone, or answering the telephone in the middle of the night when it never rang, and all this sort of lark. And,
did you have to pay for the
what?
DEC? Did you have to pay for the DEC Project Force?
Yeah, come to that in
All
a
right,
minute.
sorry. Yeah, carry on.
I never signed anything. But anyway, what happened was that I went in one day and started writing my overts up, and an instructor came, and he asked me for a target, how many lines of overts was I going to write up in this day. And this was ridiculous, for me anyway. I was honestly trying to find things, and so I didn't really make a big fuss, but I sort of backed off a bit, and I don't know, and I get immediately sent to ethics, and ethics, I don't quite remember how the interview went, but it was pretty fast, and she said, well, I must be a suppressive. I must go out and find out what my big overt was, and in the meantime, she was the only person I was to talk to, and I was to come back when I'd found the overt. This was...
So did you get a declare, an SP declare,
No.
or it was only a verbal indication?
It was verbal. It could be that a verbal was issued, a written one was issued, and it was known because I had loaned. I have a set of Ron's lectures on spools, the PTC lectures, and I had lent this to one man, lent one copy to one man. And I had also lent a book of mine to a friend of mine. And these both came back to me in parcels without a sender.
So it was told around that
They got
Antony
to know
Phillips
it,
was in
yes.
trouble or
They got
was
to
out
know it,
or...
yes,
Yeah.
And I do,
And that was how it ended with your...
that's how it ended, yes. Now this was in March '83. One of the things that happened, and this I could see without tech, they had this thing we called a gang sec check, and I sat there with one auditor with an e-meter and two people standing by demanding what was the wrong thing I had done, and there was a read and so forth. And in the end I came down to it that I had masturbated or something, and they sort of gave up. But this was before I was thrown out. This was part of the DEC Project Force. Was rather unpleasant. I can remember there was one German person there, and he didn't. I think he didn't have the money to go back to Germany. He wanted to leave, and he stole it from somebody's pocket in the cloakroom. But that was really how I came out of the church. So the point was that there was 3 months there where I was completely alone. I would have been doing the job in the evenings, but I think it's a little bit unusual. It's true that at the moment the only people I'm in contact with really are people who are Scientologists, or ex-Scientologists, if you like.
Yeah.
So I had no support, but this is the point. This is really, I don't regard myself as an ex-Scientologist. That period, particularly, there wasn't anything wrong with Scientology as I understood it.
So you were kicked out more or less from the church, but did you consider yourself still a Scientologist?
Yeah.
You were still happy about Scientology. You couldn't practice it because you were kicked out, but you were still by philosophy or whatever a Scientologist.
Yeah.
Okay. It must have changed your life somewhat that you were kicked out of the church and all the people you usually see in your day-to-day
Well,
life.
yes, the point was that there was a period, I was thrown out in March, I don't know the date, on June the 15th.
That was in 82 or 83?
83.
83.
On June the 15th, 83, which happened to be my mother's birthday, which is why I remember it, I got this letter through the door. I had a letterbox in my door then, and the postman came up all the 4 flights and delivered letters in it. This was the good old days. But anyway, I got a letter there from a friend, John Hanson, and this was not a letter, but it was a large letter which we called the Dane Tops letter. And it described how Scientology had gone mad organisation, and how Scientology was available outside. This was also funny, because up to that point I had talked to this natural healer, Biopads, not anybody else. But I saw this, I read this, and I went up to a friend of mine who lives in Sornfree, which is 2 miles north of this, or 1.5 miles. And I showed it to his wife, Vibeke, and then when he came home, it was Remak, I've forgotten his name, but when he came home, I showed it to him. It was a bit funny. I think it's very funny. He read it he's an American. He read it very superficially, and then gave it back to me and said, if you send this to anybody, don't put your return address. I sent it to 3 or 4 people, and the next day one of them, Mike in Bohr, rang me up and asked me if it was me. Oh yes, now we come to the interesting part. And I said, yes, it was me. But that point, she and Scott Leland and Ola Gerstrom, or somebody else, all of whom were in the church, so to speak, used to meet here every week. They met here because we didn't want to hold a meeting where they lived, and I was sort of out. And we formed, it was very interesting, we formed something which we called, in Danish, the Europæisk Information Center. That means the European Information Center. And the initials are DEI, which have a meaning in Scientology thing. Most of us had contacts in other countries. Scott Leland was American, and he had contacts there, and the other two or three also had contacts, and we were exchanging letters, information and so forth, and by that time I had got a job in a firm which was an engineering, the Ingenieur, I'm not sure how it goes in English, but my job was to make photocopies of large plans and of books telling people how to build what they sort of thing. And they had a Xerox machine. Xerox was fairly new, still. It was, yeah. I made a bargain with them. I've never had trouble with being a Scientologist. I told them I wanted to make copies for Scientology sort of thing, or free Scientology. I think I've usually said I've been thrown out of Scientology, and that puts me on the right side sort of thing. But anyway, I made a bargain with them that sometimes they were rushed and I had to work overtime. There was a new building to go up or something. And I would, instead of taking money for my overtime, I would make Xerox copies. There were 40 people in this chain, and so every time I collected a bundle of these papers, I'd copy them and send them out to these 40 people, so forth. That was the one thing that happened. And the other thing was, there was a registrar, the person who, a sort of a roving registrar, who went around Europe trying to get people to come to the AO. And she had a list of people, I think, in England, Germany, and one or two other countries, which she had come out, and she used this and sent them out information packs, but we didn't have anything in Scandinavia. So we collected the addresses that we could and sent out information packs to these people, which included, there were various things going around at that time. So.
And those information packs, they were based on the Dane Tops letter, or?
The Dane Tops and similar things. I think David Mayo came out with something.
Talking about what went wrong in the church.
Yeah, and what was available outside. Yeah.
Good.
So this we did for quite a while. So
did you carry on with the Freezone, or did some more levels in the Freezone, or?
No. What happened was that a centre was formed here. David Mayo formed a centre in Santa Barbara in the USA, and we had a Knots auditor here, Pierre Schutz, and we had some other people who were interested. So a centre was formed here, and they sent over. We got over Merrill Mayo, who was previously David Mayo's wife, and another man who was a Knots auditor, and they trained them up there. And this later moved to Yorkshire, which is near here. What was the question?
Did you participate in those activities? Did you take courses there, or
yes.
teach courses, or?
Well, yes, I continued Knots. Oh, yes, also that, because Knots is divided into two parts. The first part is you get it audited, which costs a bomb. And the second part is you audit it on yourself. And I wasn't sure. I had a lot of it audited on me. Pierre Schutz was actually the auditor. And somehow or other, I didn't really trust the organisation here. I was a little bit wary. So I went over to England, and there was a group in England, in East Grinstead, which was independent. And I got, that was interesting, I got the man who was running that Bisbee, he approved me for being able to go on to audited Knots, solar Knots.
Solar Knots, yeah.
And at the same time, I met an old friend of mine, Bevan Priest. I had one of these radios which also records cassette tapes, and I interviewed him a total of an hour and a half, because he had been in Australia. He was English, but he went to Australia to earn money to go on a briefing course, and he had contacts with people in Australia. And this interview describes how there was a man in the East Grinstead group, the breakout group in East Grinstead. There was a man there. Remember, telephone was difficult then. There was a man there who worked in the International Exchange in London, and he was quite illegally using his time to talk to people in Australia and find out what was happening in Australia. And there was a whole group franchise. There's a man who had a franchise, I've forgotten his name. He had about 30 people, and he was ordered to send the case folders of those 30 people to the org. And 30 is a guess.
Mm-hmm.
But they objected, and they were supposedly one of the first breakaway groups. Also, when I was at St Hill, I got hold of John McMaster was there. You see, I'd made this tape. I'd made an hour and a half tape and an hour and a half hour tape, and I had the other side of the half hour tape to fill up.
He was involved with the independent movement.
Yeah, I'm talking about independent. Yes.
Yeah. So Mark Masters was in that also.
Well, he was around, in or out. He was in communication.
Okay.
So I had a half hour tape to fill up, and I wasn't in a position to edit tapes. What people said was there, and I tried 4 times to get a half hour, and it would start off all right, but poor old John would go on a hobby horse about how terrible the church was and so forth, and I couldn't end on the half hour. That's a side thing, but the Bevan Priest tape is now public, and I'm not sure about the John McMaster. There are some John McMaster things, as they're available now as MP3 files, as of internet and so forth.
Yeah, good. Excellent.
But yeah, so that was that, and I also, after that, or during that time, there was more and more people around. For example, Fleming Funk was in Denmark at that time, and he tried to start an academy. I've got a green flyer he had with a big lion saying "Come for training, Fleming Funk" and so forth. But these things were going on there, and there was certain amount of communication, and there were magazines. There were Freezone magazines in English, 4 or 5, I think. There was a Reconnection in England. There was a Comline or something in Switzerland, but there wasn't anything in Danish. And people got a little bit complaining about it. There wasn't one in Danish, and nobody did anything about it. And then one man came along, and he started it. The name is forgotten. It was called Sørenwerk. That's the that's the first page of the first issue.
Right.
I don't know if you'll get it there, but anyway, he worked in a company which produced Pascal, which is a programming language, and actually the Pascal they produced was sold to Borland and became Turbo Pascal, which was quite famous at that time.
Yeah.
He got permission to use his firm's equipment in the evening. So a number of us came in typing in addresses and material for that magazine. And there was, at that time, I'm not sure how it came out, a little bit later it was made in photosats, in
yes.
photosats. And somebody else, these early issues of Synspunkte, the magazine was called Synspunkte, and we then had to call it, that means viewpoints. So this was the first one, came out as just as viewpoints, and that was the first year, and we found out that we could get it done cheaply by the postal authorities if we produced it in this format. So we did that, and this was all done with photosats, as you say. Now the man who did, I was sort of in the background,
Mm-hmm.
but the man who did the photosats, as slowly I got taking over all the hats. The person who was editor stopped, and there was a gap, and then another one became editor, and this sort of thing happened. But the big thing was, and I in the end took over editor, but the big thing was, by this time I got another job. I was working in a firm which imported software for PCs to Denmark from USA. This was on a veer, not to the agent, but you get them cheaper this way.
Yeah.
The man who made the photosats moved to the other end of the country and didn't have the source of the photosats. And my firm had just imported into Denmark desktop publishing.
Right.
And we made our own thing there. So I asked them, and again, I'm quite open. They knew I was from Scientology, and I asked them if I could use their equipment to make a magazine for free Scientology, independent Scientology. I got that okay. And I worked on Sunday. And somebody else set it up for this size, which was, yeah, fair enough. It was actually, the size is determined.
B5, I think it's called.
What?
B5.
Is it B5?
Yeah, it looks like B5 to me.
Well, the point is that that size is the size of the printing machine of even Turner.
Yeah.
That's the maximum it can take.
Yeah, it's a B sizes. Yeah.
It was quite. It's quite. This is very
But
interesting.
you ran this magazine for quite a number of years. You ran this magazine for quite a number of years, didn't you?
I made a long time. Yes, I made. But the point was that this magazine went only to Denmark. It's in Danish. It went to Denmark, and some to Sweden and Norway who can sort of read Danish. So I think we had to have 300 people in order to get it through the post office, and therefore some copies went out free. And well, two things happened. The first thing that happened was, as I'd become editor, that Ron, I think Ron was dead, but he would have had his birthday for a definite date. So I thought we should have an issue for that. So I collected material for that. By that time, the other magazines had died. The other English magazines had died.
Okay.
There was only Free Spirit left, and Free Spirit was not such Scientology as I would have liked. Mark Jones ran it, and he wanted to. He wanted, I suppose you could say, he wanted to wean Scientologists from Scientology, so he would present things which were similar, spiritual things.
Oh, right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't interested in that because I think Scientology is perfectly satisfactory. It was Ron's birthday, and I had got 2 or 3, 4 people. One of them was Ken Urquhart. I had known Ken Urquhart in *59, I think. He came to a group I ran, also with the other man I made this interview with. So I said, Ken Urquhart's interview is marvellous, where he describes how he worked for Ron as Ron's butler. and his conversations with Ron, he would go in the morning with a cup of chocolate and run Ron's bath for him. But we'd be talking to Ron all the time. It's all in Synspunkter, in international Ivy, international viewpoints, and he would get so Ken would get so interested in what Ron was saying, he'd forget to run the bath, and Ron would go and run it for himself, sort of thing. It's a very touching thing. So Ron has his good side and his bad side. I have a lot to say about Ron. The time I spent in Dublin teaching that course has had an enormous influence, because I can see when I'm doing this, when I've done this magazine, it has been second nature to me to try and form it so you know the formula for communication includes duplication, and you can't get another person to duplicate something which is totally out of their reality. So you have to send something which meets their reality. And the point, what I'm getting at here is, this is when I sent out this LRH birthday issue. It was number 2 in Ivy. And it was number 2 because I sent out a free issue, number 1. By the way, I had help all over. There was a married couple in England. He and she had already published books about Scientology, as the Scientology reworded, and they had a mailing list, and they donated 5,000 kroner for it, and all over I've had help from other people, and some of the other people want to remain anonymous. So I get put up as the thing that's done it all, but it's not me. The point about this is I did a number 1 issue. The number 1 issue, I was careful to select something which would be useful and useful to a new person. It included a number. Bob Ross wrote something about the various misunderstandings with regard to the grades, and that comes in there. So I ran 2 magazines for a period, and that was too much actually. Yeah. But also the other thing is that the Danish magazine, the interest seemed to wane, and so the work for the magazines is free, but the magazines cost money to print and postage money. So and there have been a few times when I've asked for donations, but generally speaking, the money has come in from subscriptions. There's also the other thing is I send these magazines out, and there's not very much response. But at the end of the year, people pay for the next year. And that's basically the response I get. It's also a question of, I've always accepted, except for, I think there's about 4 articles I haven't published that have been sent in. But generally speaking, I accept what is sent in, or accepted. But I also sort of commission articles. When I say commission, they don't get any money for it, but I ask for articles for people on subjects which I think would interest people, and really it's a reflection of me, what I would be interested in if I were them, sort of thing.
Yes. But was it last year you decided to close down Ivy?
No, it's 3 or 4 years ago.
Is that far ago already?
Yes, and that was... I had a problem there. I wanted to shut it down. I felt I'd had enough and so forth. Mm-hmm. And there were three. I got 3 people offered or two, and I sort of, the one of them was in the States, and he told me I could ring him any time of the day or night. And every time I rang, I couldn't get him. And the other one offered to do it. I needn't mention any names. And I accepted. And he ran one of these sort of groups and things.
And they were offering to take over the Ivy.
They offered to take over the Ivy. But one of the things that happened, Free Spirit changed hands twice. The first time it went over to somebody who continued it on the same line. The second time it went over to somebody who really used it to push the group. And that's not the idea. And I was about to give it over to somebody who had a group, and I was a little bit afraid that he would do that. But he then, after a conference, declared 2 or 3 people suppressive. This is a church term. They were verboten, and you mustn't communicate to them. And this isn't the sort of spirit I would I would put out in the magazine. So in the end, someone else took it over, but sent it out as a as an internet thing, and that lasted 2 years or so.
Okay.
So.
And I suppose.
But I don't know. You see, there is such an amazingly speedy change in society and in technology that magazines, I don't know that they really fill anybody's bill at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly I get magazines and don't read them.
Yeah. And I suppose, Antony, that brings us up to today, more or less. And I would like to ask you, where are you today? Do you still consider yourself a Scientologist, or do you consider yourself an ex-Scientologist? Where are you today?
I'm a Scientologist. I would consider the church as being ex-Scientologist, but I still hold the flag up for Scientology, sort of thing. I mean, the point is that I've been trying to write up my history and put it in, because I've got a homepage, Anthology Info, and I've been aiming to write up because I think the history I have gives quite an insight into Scientology, and I've been aiming to write it up, but I haven't got. It's very slow coming out. There's so much there. But the answer is that Scientology is okay, but the people who are using it at the moment are for the birds.
Well, thank you very much, Antony. It's been most interesting.